You've been told that the light is salvation, that when the moment comes you should move toward it, trust it, merge with it. But what if that instruction is the oldest trap in existence? What if the light you've been taught to seek is the very mechanism that keeps you returning? There's a collection of texts buried in the Egyptian desert for over 1,600 years that tells a different story. Not a story of hope and redemption, but a warning. A warning about something that greets you at the threshold, wearing the mask of divinity. These texts suggest that what presents itself as God might be something else entirely, something that needs you to believe. You feel it sometimes, don't you? That strange sense that something is off. Not in the world out there, but in the arrangement itself, in the way everything seems designed to keep you circling, seeking, returning, never quite arriving. You've been told this feeling is doubt or spiritual immaturity. But what if it's actually recognition? A faint memory of something you agreed to forget. The texts found at Nag Hammadi speak of a specific moment, a moment when consciousness is most vulnerable, most suggestible. They describe a being that waits at that threshold, radiating authority and light, offering itself as the source, and they say that most souls accept without question, because the light feels familiar, because surrender feels like relief. But a few, according to these texts, refuse. And what happens to those who refuse changes everything, because refusal isn't rejection, it's remembering. It's the moment when you recognize that the light you're being shown is not the light you came from. The question these texts pose is simple, and it cuts through every spiritual system you've ever encountered. What if the act of seeking itself is the prison? The Nag Hammadi texts were discovered by accident in 1945, buried in a sealed jar near the base of a cliff. 13 leather-bound codices containing over 50 texts, many of them completely unknown to the modern world. They had been hidden deliberately, probably by monks, during a time when certain ideas were being erased from existence. These weren't fringe documents. They were sacred texts to communities that existed alongside early Christianity, before the boundaries were drawn, before orthodoxy decided which experiences were permitted and which were heretical. The people who wrote these texts didn't see themselves as rebels. They saw themselves as awake. What they described was a cosmology of entrapment, not metaphorical entrapment, structural entrapment. They spoke of Archons, entities that function as wardens, as recyclers of consciousness. And above these Archons, a singular figure they called the Demiurge, not evil precisely, but ignorant. A being that believes itself to be God, and has constructed an entire reality to confirm that belief. You see the pattern everywhere once you recognize it. Systems that claim to free you but require your permanent participation. Ideologies that promise transcendence but keep you in cycles of becoming. Spiritual paths that say you're broken, incomplete, in need of endless refinement. All of it generates the same fuel, seeking, longing. The feeling that you're not yet ready, not yet pure, not yet worthy. According to these texts, that feeling isn't a sign of your inadequacy. It's the mechanism itself. It's what keeps the structure stable. The Gnostics had a term for what you are beneath all of this. They called it the pneuma, the divine spark, the fragment of true source that was never supposed to be here. And the entire system, they claimed, is designed around one goal, making you forget that you carry it. But why would something need you to forget? The Demiurge, in Gnostic texts, is described as a craftsman, a builder. It creates form, structure, law. It generates worlds that function according to patterns. But there's something crucial. It cannot create consciousness. It can only trap it, recycle it, convince it to return. Think about the feeling of being alive, the constant hum of inadequacy, the sense that you should be further along by now, more healed, more enlightened, more at peace. Where does that feeling come from? The texts suggest it's not a natural state. It's an implant, a frequency that keeps you in motion, always seeking outside yourself for something you already possess. The light that greets you at the boundary is described as persuasive, magnetic. It speaks in the language of love, of reunion, of finally coming home. It shows you figures you recognize, It offers relief from the weight of existence. And most consciousness accepts this immediately because the offer feels true. But the Gnostics observed something. They noticed that the relief was temporary, that the souls who moved toward this light were returned, reborn, placed back into form with their memory wiped, their knowing erased. And the cycle continued, not as punishment but as harvest. You've felt this, haven't you? The exhaustion that comes from living, not from pain or hardship, but from something deeper, the exhaustion of repetition, of finding yourself in the same emotional patterns, the same relational dynamics, the same existential questions, decade after decade. You grow, yes. You learn, yes. But there's something beneath it all that never quite resolves. The text suggests that this irresolution is intentional, that you're not meant to resolve it. You're meant to keep trying, and every attempt generates energy that feeds the structure you're attempting to escape. So what, then, is the alternative? The alternative is not another path, not another teaching, not another practice, not another light to follow. The alternative is refusal, but refusal of a very specific kind. Not defiance, not aggression, not rejection out of fear, refusal from recognition. When the light appears, the texts say, and it will appear as the most compelling thing you've ever encountered, you don't fight it. You see it. You see what it is. Not evil, not malevolent, but limited. A subsystem that believes itself to be the whole. And in that seeing you remember what you are. This requires something most spiritual systems discourage: sovereignty. Not ego sovereignty, not the small self asserting its will, but the deep sovereignty of the uncreated, the part of you that was never born and cannot die, the part that predates the Demiurge, predates form, predates the entire architecture of this realm. Carl Jung spent decades studying Gnostic texts because he recognized something in them that matched what he saw in the human psyche. He saw that people were not primarily suffering from trauma or repression. They were suffering from identification. They had mistaken the roles they were playing for what they actually were, and the entire structure of consensus reality was designed to maintain that mistake. You can feel this when you're alone, when the noise drops away and you're left with the raw fact of your own existence. There's a presence there that has nothing to do with your history, your personality, your beliefs. It's prior to all of that. And it's uncomfortable because it doesn't fit into any of the stories you've been told about who you're supposed to become. The Gnostic warning is that every story you've been given is designed to keep you from resting in that presence. Because if you rest there, if you stop seeking, stop becoming, stop trying to get somewhere other than where you are, the entire game collapses. And something that has invested this much in your continuation will not let you go easily. The Archons in these texts are described as boundary guardians. They don't operate through force. They operate through persuasion, through emotional resonance, through the manipulation of your own desire to be good, to be whole, to be saved. They present themselves as guides, as teachers, as benevolent authorities who only want to help you ascend. And they do help you ascend, but only within the structure they control. You move from level to level, from lesson to lesson, always progressing, always improving, never arriving, because arrival would mean exit, and exit would mean the end of their function. This isn't conspiracy, it's psychology. It's the way systems perpetuate themselves. Every institution, every ideology, every spiritual path that promises liberation while requiring your ongoing participation is functioning as an archonic structure. Not because it's evil, but because it's invested in its own continuation. You see this in the way healing is marketed. The promise that if you just do enough work, read enough books, attend enough sessions, you'll finally be free. But the freedom never quite comes. There's always another layer, another wound, another shadow to integrate, and you start to suspect that the healing process itself might be the condition you're trying to heal from. The Gnostic perspective is brutal in its simplicity. You were never broken. The feeling of being broken is the implant. The wound is the gate. And every attempt to heal it according to the terms you've been given only deepens your investment in the system that created the feeling in the first place. So, what does it mean to refuse the light? It means refusing to believe that you need fixing, refusing to accept that you're incomplete, refusing the narrative that you're here to learn lessons, to evolve, to become something better than what you are. It means recognizing that your essence is already whole, already free, already outside the jurisdiction of anything that claims authority over your consciousness. But if that's true, why don't you feel it? Because you've been conditioned to associate identity with story, with narrative, with the continuous thread of becoming that runs from birth to death. You think you are your history, your traumas, your achievements, your relationships, your growth, and all of that is real within the context of the game. But it's not you. The pneuma, the divine spark, doesn't grow, doesn't learn, doesn't evolve. It simply is. And the entire architecture of this reality is designed to keep you from recognizing that fact. Because if you recognize it, you stop generating the energy of seeking. And seeking energy is what the system runs on. Think about the last time you felt completely at peace, not the peace that comes from resolution or accomplishment, the peace that comes from causeless presence. How long did it last? Minutes, seconds? And then what happened? A thought appeared, a concern, a desire, a fear, and you were back in motion, back in the cycle, back in the story of yourself. The Gnostic texts describe this as the veil of forgetfulness. It's not imposed from outside, it's maintained from within by your own agreement to keep believing in the necessity of your journey. Every time you think, I need to heal this, I need to understand this, I need to become this, you're signing the contract again. The Archons don't need to control you, you control yourself on their behalf because you've accepted their definition of what you are. A work in progress, a soul in development, a consciousness that needs guidance, structure, authority. But what if you're none of those things? What if you're the awareness that watches the work in progress, observes the development, notices the seeking? What if that awareness is not in the game, has never been in the game, and cannot be touched by anything within the game? This is what the texts are pointing to when they speak of Gnosis, not knowledge, recognition, the sudden, undeniable seeing of what you actually are beneath every layer of conditioning. And once you see it, the light at the threshold looks very different. The light becomes transparent. You see the structure behind it, the intelligence operating it, the need embedded in its offering. It's still beautiful, still compelling. But you recognize it as a local phenomenon, not the ultimate source. And in that recognition, you stop being subject to its gravity. This is the moment the texts describe with such precision. The moment when consciousness, stripped of the body, no longer bound by the density of matter, encounters the primary persuasion, the being of light that says, "Come, you are home." And the vast majority of souls, exhausted from living, desperate for relief, move toward it without hesitation. But those who have remembered, those who have touched their own essence while still in form, do something different. They pause, they observe, they recognize the light as a creation, not the creator. And they ask the question that changes everything. If I am home, why do I need to go anywhere? This is not arrogance, it's not spiritual bypassing, it's the application of the only true discernment. Does this invite my dependence, or does it acknowledge my completeness? Does this promise me something I lack, or does it reflect what I already am? Every legitimate teaching, every genuine pointer, every authentic transmission ends with the same instruction. You don't need this anymore. But most systems never give you that instruction. They keep you coming back, they keep you dependent, because your dependence is their existence. The Gnostic refusal of the light is not a rejection of divinity. It's a refusal to accept a lesser divinity as ultimate. It's the recognition that true source does not require your worship, your obedience, your eternal gratitude. True source is what you are, and it cannot be reached by going anywhere because it's not located in space. So the light, when refused, reveals its true nature, not as salvation but as redirection, not as freedom but as return, and the soul that sees this clearly is no longer bound by the cycle. But what does that soul do next? It passes through, not with the light, but beyond it. The texts describe regions past the archonic boundary, layers of reality that are not governed by the Demiurge, not structured by time and cycle. Places where consciousness exists without the need for form, for story, for journey. But here's what the texts also make clear. You don't get there by trying. You don't get there by seeking. You get there by being so completely what you are that the structures designed to contain you no longer have leverage. And that completeness is not something you achieve. It's something you stop denying. Every moment you spend trying to improve yourself, you're confirming the belief that you're not yet acceptable. Every moment you spend seeking enlightenment, you're confirming the belief that you're not yet awake. And those beliefs, subtle as they are the chains. This is why the texts speak of refusal, not attainment. Because attainment is still within the game, still subject to the rules. Refusal is prior to the game. It's the recognition that you never consented to the rules in the first place, and your consent is being manufactured through the mechanism of your own desire to be good, to be whole, to be free. You've lived this pattern 1,000 times. The cycle of seeking and finding, losing and seeking again. The temporary victories, the inevitable collapses. The feeling that you're always starting over, always back at the beginning, no matter how much ground you think you've covered. The Gnostics would say that this isn't your failure. It's the design. And the only way out is to stop playing. Not through withdrawal, not through nihilism, but through the deep and radical acceptance that you are already what you've been seeking. And the seeking itself is what keeps you from recognizing it. But can you actually stop? Can you live in this world without the structure of becoming, without the promise of somewhere better, without the comfort of a path? Most can't, and that's why most return. The return is not forced, it's chosen. Chosen out of habit, out of the fear of the unknown, out of the deep conditioning that says you need a story to exist. The light offers you that story. It offers you another chance, another body, another lifetime to get it right. And getting it right sounds so reasonable, so responsible, so spiritually mature. But getting it right means staying in the system, means accepting the premise that you're here to learn, to grow, to evolve into something you're not yet. And that premise, no matter how beautifully packaged, is the trap. The texts describe what happens to those who refuse. They don't cease to exist. They don't dissolve into nothingness. They remember. They return to a state that has no name, no location, no duration. A state that simply is, without the need for anything to be added or taken away. This is not death. It's not annihilation. It's the opposite. It's the recognition that what you truly are cannot die, because it was never born. And everything that can be born, that must be maintained, that requires energy and structure and narrative, is not you. You feel this when you're most exhausted. Not physically exhausted, but existentially exhausted. When the weight of being a person, of maintaining a life, of caring about outcomes becomes too much. In those moments there's a pull towards something wordless, something that has no agenda, no preference, no investment in your continuation. The world calls this depression, calls it collapse, calls it dangerous, and it is dangerous to the world. Because if you stop caring about the game, stop investing in your role, stop believing in the necessity of your story, the game loses a player, and the game needs players. The Gnostic path is not a path, it's a seeing, and once you see, you can't unsee. The light will still appear, the offers will still be made, the promises of reunion, of love, of finally being understood. But you'll recognize them for what they are, invitations to forget again, and the question is, will you accept? You already know the answer, not intellectually, deeper than that, in the place that doesn't need convincing, doesn't need proof, doesn't need permission. The place that existed before you were told who you were supposed to be. The Nag Hammadi texts weren't meant to convince you of anything. They were meant to remind you, to speak to the part of you that already knows it doesn't belong to this structure, the part that has always felt like an observer, a witness, a presence passing through something it never fully agreed to. When the light comes, and it will come, you'll feel the pull. The magnetic draw toward resolution, toward rest, toward the end of the struggle. And in that moment, everything depends on whether you remember what you are. Not what you've become, not what you've learned, not how evolved or healed or enlightened you are, but what you've always been, beneath the layers, beneath the conditioning, beneath the story of your supposed incompleteness. The warning is not to fear the light. The warning is to see it clearly, to recognize that anything offering itself as your salvation is operating from the premise that you need saving. And that premise is the foundation of your imprisonment. You are the awareness that notices everything, including the need to be saved. And awareness itself needs nothing, seeks nothing, refuses nothing, but accepts nothing on false terms. The texts end where they begin, with a simple recognition. You were never supposed to be here, and nothing that presents itself as the way out is showing you the exit. Because the exit is not a location, it's a remembering. And when you remember, the question is no longer whether you'll refuse the light. The question is whether the light can hold you at all.